You disowned me for loving him, but I still invited you.
And I came because losing you scared me more than my pride.
It started with a dinner. Emily had been rehearsing the moment for weeks, imagining how it might go, picturing her parents' faces, hoping for at least polite curiosity. Instead, the moment she stepped through the front door holding Marcus's hand, she felt it. Tension, the kind that doesn't need words. Her mother was first to greet them, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome," she said, hugging Emily, then nodding stiffly to Marcus. Her father, David, stood a few steps behind, arms folded, expression unreadable. He didn't say a word. Emily had expected awkwardness. She hadn't expected this wall of silence. Dinner was worse. The table was set beautifully: roasted chicken, garlic bread, mashed potatoes, the kind of food that once felt like home. But that night, it all tasted like ash. Emily tried to carry the conversation. She spoke about her new job in graphic design. Marcus mentioned his freelance photography gigs and some recent community projects. Her mother listened quietly, nodding along. David said nothing. He barely made eye contact. Then, finally, he spoke. "So, Marcus," David began, still looking down at his plate, "where exactly did you grow up?" Marcus's voice was calm. "Detroit, sir. Raised by my mother. Public school system." David gave a slow nod. Bet that was educational." The pause that followed stretched longer than the question itself. Emily felt her stomach twist. She gave a nervous laugh, trying to change the subject. "Dad, how's that treehouse project coming? Still haven't broken your thumb again?" David didn't look up. "Don't try to distract me, Emily." Her heart sank. David turned toward Marcus again. "Let me ask you something straight. You really think you're right for my daughter?" "David," her mother whispered, alarmed. But he didn't stop. "You think this is going to work out? Long term? You think you're going to build a family? Raise kids that'll be treated like they belong, like they're normal?" Emily froze. Marcus answered calmly, "I think what Emily and I have is real. I came here out of respect. Because she loves you." David finally met Marcus's gaze, his voice sharp, cutting. "You don't belong in this family." Emily stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That's enough." Her voice cracked with emotion, but she didn't sit down. And neither did Marcus. He rose quietly, shoulders square, expression unreadable. David didn't apologize. He didn't even blink. Emily looked straight at him. "If you can't accept him, you don't accept me." No one moved. No one spoke. They walked out without another word. Back at Marcus's apartment, Emily collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. She cried until her throat was raw, not just from what was said, but from what wasn't. Her father had made his position clear. Marcus didn't blame her. He didn't press for apologies or explanations. He simply held her as she trembled, whispering soft reassurances, anchoring her the way her family never had. Later that night, a message lit up her phone screen. "You've made your choice. Don't come back." Dad, she stared at it in silence. Then, slowly, she deleted the message and the contact. The next morning, she made coffee, got dressed, went to work. And just like that, Emily began the quiet, painful process of rebuilding a life without her father in it. But pain has a strange way of lingering in the quiet moments. When Marcus slept beside her and the world fell silent, she sometimes found herself wondering, was love really supposed to cost this much? What she didn't know not yet was that the price hadn't even been fully paid. More would come, and it would change everything. Emily didn't speak to her parents for 3 weeks after the dinner. She tried to focus on work, tried to be present with Marcus, but her mind kept circling back to that night, to the look in her father's eyes, to the way the door closed behind them like the final note in a funeral song. Then one afternoon, while she was sorting emails at her desk, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother. "Can we talk?" Short, hesitant, not angry but not warm either. Emily stared at the screen. Her chest tightened, but she replied, "Okay, I'll stop by after work." She didn't tell Marcus. When she arrived at her parents' house, her mother was already on the porch. The yard looked exactly the same as always: trimmed hedges, quiet street, fading sunlight brushing over the roof like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Her mother opened the door without a word. Emily stepped inside. David was already at the kitchen table, sitting in the same chair where he'd insulted Marcus 3 weeks earlier. He looked up, his expression unreadable. If anything, he looked tired, not remorseful, not softened, just exhausted, like he'd been carrying anger on his back and was starting to feel its weight. Her mother gestured toward a chair. Emily didn't sit. David didn't waste time. "This isn't going to work," he said, tone clipped. "You and that man. It's not going to last." Emily clenched her jaw. "You don't know anything about us." "I know enough," he said. "I know what kind of future you're walking into. You think love fixes everything? Wait until your kids are born. Wait until people stare at them on the street. Wait until he loses a job for being too loud or too aggressive. Then come tell me I was wrong." Her mother looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Emily folded her arms across her chest. "What I'm walking into is love. Real love. Not conditions. Not fear dressed up as realism. I'm not going to apologize for choosing that." David exhaled slowly, like he was preparing for something final. "I'm giving you a choice." He said it like a man delivering a sentence. "You can be with him or you can be part of this family, but not both. Not anymore." Emily's heart dropped. "You're serious? You want to keep pretending this is going to work? Fine, but don't expect to sit at our table. Don't bring him around here. Don't show up with babies expecting us to pretend this is normal. You made your decision, now live with it." Her mother opened her mouth to protest, but David cut her off with a sharp look. "This isn't about hate," he added coldly. "It's about standards, about protecting you from what you're too blind to see." Emily stared at him, and for a moment, the room spun. The voice in her head, the one that had been whispering for weeks now, screamed, "He's never going to change." There was no fear in his voice, no sorrow, just rigid certainty, like someone who had long ago built a wall around his beliefs and thrown away the key. Emily stepped back from the table. "Okay," she said quietly. Her mother blinked. "What do you mean?" I choose him." David straightened. "Then you're not my daughter anymore." The words fell like glass on tile, shattering. Emily didn't cry. Not yet. She turned toward the door. "I hope one day," she said, voice steady, "you realize what you've done and what you've lost." She left without another word. That night, Marcus opened the door to find her standing there in silence. Her face said everything. He didn't ask questions. He simply pulled her into his chest, and she let go, not with tears, but with exhaustion. Her body sank into his like she had finally stopped holding herself up. He said, "I'm not his daughter anymore," she murmured. Marcus didn't speak. He just held her tighter. The next morning, she started packing. They found a small apartment on the edge of the city, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and a kitchen barely big enough for two. But it was quiet. And theirs. For a while, life was simple and heavy. Emily worked, cooked, came home. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she cried in the shower so Marcus wouldn't hear. But she never talked about the ultimatum again. Not out loud. Still, the ache lingered. Her father's words echoed in the silence between sentences, in the spaces Marcus never asked about. She knew he didn't want to push her. He was patient, respectful, steady. Everything her father had claimed he wouldn't be. And little by little, Emily began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice. Even if it cost her everything she used to call home. Emily and Marcus moved into a worn-down apartment on the west side of the city. The walls, once white, had faded to a dull cream. The wooden floors creaked with every step, and the kitchen was so small they had to take turns making breakfast. But it was theirs. There was no housewarming, no welcome from family, no calls from her mother, no texts from old friends. Just silence and the sound of a new life beginning. Marcus tried to make the space feel like home. He bought second-hand curtains from a thrift store. Emily picked out mismatched plates from a garage sale. It wasn't much, but they filled the rooms with laughter when they could, and silence when they couldn't. On the third night, Emily hung a framed photo on the wall, the two of them smiling in a sunlit park, taken just a week before the dinner that tore everything apart. When Marcus asked if she was sure she wanted it up, she nodded. "This is who we are," she said softly. "This is real." They lived on savings at first. Marcus worked odd jobs, delivery shifts, part-time warehouse work. Emily applied to every admin position she could find. She landed one at a dental clinic 3 subway stops away. The pay was modest, but steady. Still, money was tight. They skipped dinners out. Every grocery run was calculated down to the cent. Rent was always just barely covered. Some nights, they stayed up doing nothing, just lying side by side in the dim light of the bedroom, talking about dreams that now felt further away than ever. Other nights, Emily cried into Marcus's shoulder without explaining why. He never asked. He just held her, like she was something fragile and sacred. But the outside world wasn't as gentle. Emily noticed the way people stared when she and Marcus held hands on the street. A woman at the grocery store once whispered something under her breath when they passed. On the subway, a man bumped into Marcus hard, then muttered, "Watch it, man," with venom that had nothing to do with clumsiness. Marcus brushed it off. He always did. But Emily couldn't. She carried the weight of every stare, every sneer. And sometimes in the quiet moments, her father's voice echoed again, "Wait until people stare at your kids. Wait until he's called aggressive for just speaking." She hated that he was right about the world, not about Marcus. And yet, through it all, Marcus never wavered. He made her coffee every morning. He checked her bike tires when she commuted. He learned to cook the one dish her grandmother used to make, cornbread and chili, even though the recipe was scribbled in broken handwriting on a scrap of paper Emily had almost thrown out. He showed up every day with patience and care and quiet strength. One Sunday afternoon, they went to a small bookstore 2 blocks from the apartment. Emily lingered in the poetry section, fingers tracing over the spines of forgotten writers. Marcus disappeared into the back. 10 minutes later, he returned holding a second-hand children's book. "What's that for?" she asked. He smiled. "For someday." She blinked. I mean, he said, "I see a future, even if your father doesn't." Emily didn't reply. She just leaned into him, forehead resting against his chest. There were no guarantees. The world hadn't changed. But in that moment, she knew something for sure. She had made the right choice. Even if the cost was her father. Even if the road ahead was long and heavy. Because Marcus saw her, chose her, loved her. And together, they were building something stronger than hate. David sat alone in his office, staring blankly at the spreadsheet on his monitor. Numbers floated before him, meaningless. The quiet hum of fluorescent lights filled the room. It had been weeks since he'd spoken to Emily. Weeks since she chose that man over her family. He told himself he'd done the right thing. He was protecting her, keeping the family name clean, preserving tradition. But something inside him gnawed an itch he couldn't quite scratch. Something colder than anger and deeper than pride. Emptiness. At work, things started to shift. One afternoon in the break room, his colleague Priya walked in just as David made a comment under his breath while watching a news segment on interracial couples. She froze. "Excuse me?" David shrugged. "I'm just saying it's not for everyone. People like that don't really mix." Priya stared at him. "People like that?" David opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. His chest tightened. She walked out without saying another word. The next morning, he found a sticky note on his desk. "It's 2025. Grow up." It wasn't signed, but he had a feeling it wasn't just one person. Over the next week, the glances began. Colleagues paused their conversations when he entered. No more casual lunches, no more small talk by the printer. He was being iced out. Then came the diversity meeting. His manager announced a new inclusion initiative and invited anyone with family experiences related to race to speak. Before David could say anything, someone muttered, "Maybe David should go first." Laughter, sharp and cutting. David flushed. "You all think I'm a bigot?" Nobody said it outright, but nobody denied it either. That night, at home, he poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat on the edge of his bed. The house was too quiet. His wife, Marlene, barely spoke to him anymore. She hadn't agreed with his outburst at the dinner, but she hadn't fought him either. Instead, she withdrew slowly, silently. They had dinner together, but without conversation. She no longer left his coffee ready in the morning. He hadn't even noticed when she stopped folding his shirts. It was as if the whole world was distancing itself from him. He opened his email. A new one had come in from Emily's college alumni fund. He usually ignored them, but this time, he clicked. The banner showed Emily, smiling during graduation, standing next to Marcus proudly. He stared at Marcus's face. Calm, kind eyes. A gentle hand resting behind Emily's back. and her radiant, peaceful. She didn't look like someone who needed saving. She looked loved. He closed the laptop. For the first time since that dinner, he allowed himself to wonder, what if I was wrong? What if he hadn't been protecting her? What if he'd just been trying to control her? The shame came slow, like fog crawling over a field. And then all at once, he remembered every word he'd shouted that night, every line he'd crossed, every fear he'd disguised as family values. And suddenly, the office silence didn't feel like unfair punishment. It felt deserved. It started with a dinner. Emily had been rehearsing the moment for weeks, imagining how it might go, picturing her parents' faces, hoping for at least polite curiosity. Instead, the moment she stepped through the front door holding Marcus's hand, she felt it. Tension. The kind that doesn't need words. Marlene hadn't spoken much since the dinner. She moved through the house like a ghost, folding laundry in silence, setting plates down without a glance, answering questions with one-word replies. David tried not to notice, but the silence pressed on him like a heavy coat. One morning, while dusting the old bookshelf in the upstairs hallway, Marlene found something wedged between two cookbooks. A faded yellow envelope. Her mother's handwriting. It was addressed to Emily. Marlene's breath caught. Her mother had passed away 3 years earlier, just before Emily started college. She had been the soft voice of reason in their family, never loud, never confrontational, but always quietly watching. She held the envelope in her hands for a long moment. Then she walked down the stairs, sat at the dining table, and opened it. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone by now, and I'm sorry I didn't get to say this in person. You've always been brave, even as a child. I knew that one day, your courage would take you somewhere beyond this house, beyond the narrow walls of tradition. I want you to know something. When I was 22, I fell in love with a man named Elijah. He was kind, smart, and made me laugh so hard I cried. But he was black, and back then, that meant something different, something dangerous. My parents forbade it. I walked away. I married someone safe. Your grandfather was good to me, but a part of my heart never healed. So when you love boldly, my sweet girl, you're doing what I never could. I don't know who he is, but I hope he treats you well. And if your parents ever tried to stop you, remember that love is never the enemy. Let them be wrong. Let them learn. And if they don't, keep walking. I love you always. Grandma June. Marlene's hand trembled. Tears spilled before she realized they had begun to fall. She read the letter again, slower this time, word by word, line by line, letting the truth settle in. Her mother had known this pain, and she'd never told a soul. That evening, after David came home from work, Marlene sat him down. No TV, no drinks, just the two of them across the kitchen table and the letter between them. David read it in silence. His jaw clenched. He reread certain lines twice. When he reached the end, he stared down at his hands for a long time. This isn't, he began, but the words fell apart. She was trying to protect Emily, Marlene said gently. She knew what you don't. David didn't respond. Marlene slid the envelope toward him. You need to send it to her. He looked up, shaken. And say what? Say you were wrong. David shook his head, voice tight. She won't listen. Then write it anyway, Marlene said. Because whether she reads it or not, she deserves to hear it. From you. That night, after Marlene went to bed, David sat alone at the desk in his study. He took out a sheet of paper, and for the first time in months, he began to write, not to argue, not to defend, but to confess. It was a rainy Thursday when the letter arrived. Emily opened the mailbox and found a single cream-colored envelope, handwritten. No return address, but the penmanship was unmistakable. Her father's. She froze on the porch, the letter clutched in one hand, raindrops soaking the corners. Marcus came to the door and stopped short when he saw her face. What is it? He asked gently. She handed him the envelope, her eyes distant. It's from him. Marcus raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Back inside, Emily stood at the kitchen counter, the envelope resting before her like a fragile bomb. For a long time, she didn't move. Then, finally, she opened it. Emily, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope, maybe, you'll let me explain. I was wrong. About Marcus. About you. About everything I said that night. I thought I was protecting you from something that could hurt you, but all I did was become the one who hurt you most. I judged him before I knew him. And worse, I judged you for loving him. I've spent weeks thinking about what I said, what I lost. Your silence has been louder than any words you could have spoken, and I deserved every day of it. Your grandmother left behind a letter I never knew about. She told me something she never had the courage to tell me while she was alive, about a man she once loved and gave up because of people like me. Reading her words broke something in me, or maybe it fixed something. I don't know which. All I know is this. You were right to walk away, but I'm still your father, and I still love you, even if I don't deserve to say it. If there's even the smallest part of you that still wants me in your life, I'll be here, waiting. Dad! Emily finished reading and sat down slowly. Her hands trembled. Marcus read the letter over her shoulder. His expression didn't change, he just waited, patient and quiet, the way he always had. Well, he finally said, "That's something." Emily stared at the words. Her father's handwriting looked smaller somehow, less sure. It wasn't an apology full of excuses. It wasn't polished or poetic, but it was honest. For the first time since she left, she felt something unexpected. Not relief, not forgiveness, just possibility. She folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope. "I need time," she whispered. Marcus nodded. Of course. Emily didn't know if she'd call her father, or write him back, or show up at his door one day with nothing but a suitcase full of questions. But for the first time, the pain didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a door, one she might someday open. 2 weeks passed before Emily picked up the phone. No calls, no texts, just her fingers hovering over the screen, night after night, wondering what she'd even say if he answered. Then, one quiet Sunday afternoon, she simply dialed. The phone rang 3 times. "Hello?" David's voice was cautious, unsure. There was a pause, a heartbeat. "It's me," Emily said. The silence on the other end swelled. Then a shaky breath. "Emily." Neither of them spoke for a full 10 seconds. The sound of the rain tapping the window filled the space. "I got your letter," she said. "I didn't think you'd call," he admitted. "I almost didn't." Her voice cracked. "But I read it twice." David let out a breath. "Thank you for reading it." Emily hesitated. "I'm not calling to fix everything. I didn't want the next thing between us to be another goodbye." That sentence hung in the air, soft, trembling, but firm. "I understand," he said, voice low. "I don't expect anything. I'm glad to hear your voice." There was a pause again. Then David asked carefully, "How's Marcus?" "He's good," Emily replied. "Working hard. Being patient with me, which is more than I deserve sometimes." "You deserve someone who's patient." His voice almost broke. "I see that now." Emily swallowed hard. "I'm not ready to come home. I don't know if I ever will, but I'm not angry anymore. Not like I was." "I don't expect home," he said. "Maybe just coffee?" She almost laughed. "You want to meet up? In person? If you're ready," he said. "If you ever are." Emily didn't answer right away, but she didn't say no. The following weekend, they met at a small coffee shop halfway between their homes. Marcus didn't come. Emily wanted to do this alone. David was already seated when she arrived, nervously stirring his coffee, eyes darting to the door every 5 seconds. When she stepped in, his shoulders stiffened then softened. She looked older than he remembered, not in age, but in presence. Wiser, stronger, a woman now, not a daughter in his image. "Hi," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. David cleared his throat. "Hi." There was an awkward pause. Then, tentatively, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I found this from when you were 8. He pushed it across the table. "A drawing. You made us all superheroes." Emily unfolded the paper. Stick figures with capes and masks. Hers said the peacemaker. His said super dad. She smiled, and for the first time in months, it wasn't bitter. "Guess I dropped my cape somewhere," he said with a sad chuckle. "Maybe," she said, folding it again. "But you're trying to find it." David looked at her, really looked, and saw his daughter for the first time, not as a child, not as someone to protect, but as a person he could learn from. They didn't fix everything that day. There were still cracks, but they sat for over an hour, talking, laughing a little, even disagreeing gently without anger, like people who had finally begun to remember how to love each other without conditions. And that was something. Maybe not everything, but something. A month after the coffee shop meeting, Emily and Marcus stood outside her childhood church on a crisp Sunday morning. The place hadn't changed much: white columns, a tall steeple, manicured hedges out front. But it felt smaller now, less like a homecoming, more like a test. "I don't have to go in," Marcus said, straightening the collar of his jacket. "This is your history, not mine." "No," Emily replied, gripping his hand. "This is ours now." She hadn't set foot in this church since the night of the argument, since her father's voice had echoed against these very walls in sharp judgment. But today was different. Today, they were choosing to step in together. Inside, heads turned, some in surprise, some in confusion, a few in outright disapproval. Mrs. Crawford, her father's longtime friend, narrowed her eyes when she saw Marcus. A man Emily had once called like a second mother shifted uncomfortably in her pew. The organ music continued, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. David stood near the back. When he saw them, he gave a small nod. No grand gestures, just quiet support. They sat near the center. Emily's fingers dug into Marcus's palm. He didn't flinch. After the sermon, the pastor spoke kindly, but with caution. "We're all children of God," he said, eyes grazing toward Emily and Marcus. "But we must also examine our hearts when judgment clouds grace." Outside, as the crowd filtered out, Emily overheard fragments of conversation. "Did you see who she brought? Her poor father. Imagine the shame. She always was a little rebellious, but there were other voices too. She looks happy. Good for her. Took courage. She hasn't changed, just grown." As they walked to the car, a small voice called out, "Emily." It was Claire, her childhood best friend. They hadn't spoken in years. "I heard you moved back," Claire said, nervously twisting the strap of her purse. "And I heard about what happened." Emily waited. "I'm sorry I didn't reach out sooner. I didn't know what to say. But I'm glad you're back." Marcus stepped forward, offering a polite smile. Claire's eyes darted to him, then she extended her hand. "I'm Claire." "Marcus." They shook hands. Claire turned to Emily. "If you ever want to grab lunch or talk, I'd like that." Emily felt a small warmth bloom in her chest. "Yeah," she said, "I'd like that too." On the drive home, Marcus was quiet. "What are you thinking?" Emily asked. He smiled. "That you're braver than you think." She rested her head against the window. "That's the thing. I used to think being brave meant standing up to people, and now I think it means walking in any way, even when you're not sure anyone wants you there." Marcus reached over and squeezed her hand. Outside, the town looked the same, but inside, something was shifting. She hadn't erased the whispers, the doubts, or the old scars, but she'd shown up, and that was enough for now. Emily stood in the corner of the bridal boutique, staring at herself in the mirror. The dress was simple, satin, sleeveless, a soft ivory that brought out the warmth in her skin. She looked radiant, but the emptiness on her face betrayed what she felt inside. There was no mother fussing over the hem, no sisters squealing with joy, no aunts or cousins giving unsolicited advice. Just Claire, the one person who had stepped back into her life and refused to let go again. "You look beautiful," Claire whispered. Emily forced a smile. "Thank you." Claire leaned closer. "They're the ones missing out, not you." At home, Marcus sat at the dining table, surrounded by scraps of invitation designs, catering quotes, and venue options. But his eyes were on one envelope, untouched, unsealed. "You sure you don't want to send it?" he asked gently. Emily sat across from him, eyes lingering on her father's name on the envelope. "I don't want to beg," she said. "I already did that once." Marcus didn't push. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." After a moment, she reached out, sealed the envelope, and wrote 2 words beneath the address: "No expectations." The wedding planning moved slowly. Their budget was tight, no big venue, no designer, anything. Just a garden Marcus had found through a friend, and a local soul food chef who agreed to cater for cheap. Everything felt held together by thread and sheer will. Each guest RSVP felt like a tiny victory. Claire's parents, 2 of Marcus's co-workers, the neighbor from their apartment complex, A few people from Emily's past who had quietly cheered from the sidelines. But her family? Nothing. Not a word. 3 weeks before the ceremony, David called. "I got the invitation," he said. Emily's stomach tightened. "You don't have to come." "I know," he said, "but I want to." She hesitated. "You sure? It's not going to be a traditional wedding." "I don't care about tradition anymore," he said. "I care about being there when my daughter starts a new life. If you'll let me." Emily swallowed. "Only if you do it without conditions." David paused. "No conditions. Just love." The day of the wedding arrived with warm sun and the smell of magnolias in the air. The garden was small, intimate. 30 guests. No altar. Just a path lined with chairs and wildflowers. Marcus stood at the front, hands clasped nervously, his suit just slightly wrinkled at the cuffs. Then, music, and Emily appeared. Every head turned. David was among them, standing in the back, watching her with misty eyes. He didn't walk her down the aisle, that role was hers alone. But he was there. That mattered. Emily met Marcus at the front. They didn't need long vows. Just the truth. "I choose you," she said, tears in her eyes. Without permission. Without apology. "I choose you," Marcus echoed. "Because love isn't something to be approved, it's something to be honored." When they kissed, the small crowd erupted in cheers and laughter. David wiped his eyes quietly in the back. Later, during the toasts, Claire stood up. To the couple who proved that love doesn't need permission to be right, David followed her, hesitating at first. Then, "I judged what I didn't understand. I pushed away what I should have embraced. But today, I see the woman my daughter has become, and I see the man she's chosen, and I'm proud." "I hope that's not too late to say," Emily nodded, eyes full. "It's not." The night ended with dancing under string lights and barefoot laughter on dewy grass. Not a perfect wedding, but a true one. And that was everything. 3 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived at Emily's apartment. No return address. No markings but her name written in her father's careful, slanted handwriting. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper, the kind her father used to write sermon notes on. The ink was slightly smudged in places, as if tears had blurred the lines as they were written. "Emily, I don't expect you to forgive me. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I need you to know why I did what I did. Not to excuse it, but to explain it. When I was your age, I fell in love too. With a woman named Marcia. She was kind, funny, black. We were serious. I asked her to marry me. My father threatened to cut me off. The church elders said I'd lose my place in the community. I was weak. I let them scare me. I let them make me believe I had to choose between love and belonging. And I chose wrong. I broke her heart. I broke my own. I thought if I buried that mistake deep enough, it would disappear. Then you brought Marcus home, and I saw my old cowardice reflected in your courage. It scared me. That night when I told you to leave, I wasn't rejecting you. I was rejecting the part of myself I'd never forgiven. Watching you strong, proud, defiant, it forced me to see what I lost. I know I can't go back and fix it, but maybe I can do better now. If you let me. Love, Dad. Emily's hands trembled as she folded the letter again. Marcus walked in, saw her frozen on the couch. Everything okay? She held up the envelope silently. He sat beside her, waited. After a long pause, she whispered, "He was me, once." That weekend, Emily and David met at a quiet cafe. No big speeches, no tearful reunions. Just a shared coffee and the slow rebuilding of a bridge that had once been burned to ash. They didn't talk about the past. Not yet. Instead, they talked about small things: her job, his garden, the way the town was changing. And somewhere between the first and second cup, they laughed. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Months passed. Emily and Marcus found a rhythm in married life. There were bills, dishes, late-night arguments over nothing, and quiet Sunday mornings wrapped in shared warmth. They weren't trying to be perfect, just present, honest, real. One evening, Emily pulled out her wedding album. She turned to the last page where a candid photo showed David sitting in the back row, blurry and almost hidden. But there, she smiled. Forgiveness wasn't instant. Trust wasn't fully restored. But the healing had begun. And sometimes that was more powerful than an apology.